Companies that are looking to implement AI but don't have their process mapped out and thought through already are going to have a tough time to do it.
That's Eamon Graziano, CEO and founder of B&E Management and Consulting. He spent years working inside complex organizations and law firms.
For a company, you need to really have a defined process to be able to say, how is AI going to make this better or more efficient?
He explains why individual AI adoption happens more quickly, while firm-wide adoption requires more intention. When teams take the time to define their workflows and align around clear goals, AI becomes a powerful tool that strengthens execution and helps everyone work better together.
People functionally think AI is coming for their jobs.
Eamon reframes the fear around AI and explains how firms can use it to grow people and not replace them. By the end of this conversation, you'll learn how to think about AI as a leadership and process challenge, not as a technical challenge, and how firms can use automation to scale without breaking trust or culture. I'm Julien Emery, and this is the Scalable Law Blueprint. Just to give a sense of what the operations were like at the firms that you were overseeing. So I think you were overseeing like 6 different firms, but at least some of the ones that we worked with, like how many people were doing intake, evidence collection, and what was like the before versus after state once SuperPanel was fully implemented in terms of number of people, volume of cases, efficiency, cost per acquisition, all that kind of stuff, just to sort of get a sense of the before and after picture.
Right. It's a great point, because cost per acquisition is typically a marketing KPI, which you may not think intake conversion is going to have a huge effect on, although it does. Yeah, so CPLG, I think at the time when we started rolling out SuperPanel on live leads, we had around 50 intakers doing document collection and signing cases, signing around 500 clients a month. Over time, over the next few months, as we rolled SuperPanel up to about 100% of leads, I don't think we didn't really fire anybody, but we did not hire anybody new, over that period of time. And the intake team whittled down to around 15 people. When I left, they were signing 700 cases a month. So those are 2, huge increases in efficiency. And what's great was that was the firm that had the lowest CPA. And we had some benchmarks because that firm was running one practice type, and we had 2 other firms running the same practice type. So we could really see like which CPA, where the CPAs were doing well, like what was working well. So we were able, part of the advantage of having a portfolio like that was we were able to A/B test different things, both on intake, but also on the marketing side of things. And the CPA at that firm, the firm where we fully rolled out SuperPanel first, was the best. A lot of that was because the SuperPanel was able to convert more of the leads. And then over a longer period of time, those leads that maybe a human wouldn't continue to follow up on, this was lemon law, so there's like a longer life cycle of following up on leads. You might have a car that's not going to be qualified now, but a year or 2 years later, they did end up having enough problems to be a case. That never, the never give up of the AI really paid dividends on like a long-term kind of perspective, I guess.
Yeah, makes sense. And so it sounds like the end result was, it sounds like you had some there's always high turnover, right, in intake. And so it sounds like you started with about 50 people, then people sort of naturally left. You didn't rehire people, and I remember you guys just keeping your top performers.
Yeah, that was great. The top performers loved it. It was incredible for the best people. They went from signing, and obviously they're bonused based on how many cases they signed. So it heavily incentivized the best people to stay, which was great.
I guess what's interesting, so when you and I met, and frankly, even quite a ways after you and I met and started working together, the conversation was kind of like, can AI do certain parts of intake or not? Should it? Will humans accept it? Or will consumers accept it? And I feel like we're kind of turning the corner where people are recognizing like, oh, if we look at the pace of change and advancements in the last 12 months or 24 months, pick whatever time period you want to look at, it's almost like, without a doubt, I think if anyone is doubting the fact that AI will be able to handle a lot, like, you're probably way behind. The conversation changed, like, we know this is coming. How do we get it to actually work in our firm? And since you left your role as COO across a number of firms, and obviously since started working with us and helping us and consulting a bunch of clients that we work with or are starting to work with across PI and employment law and mass tort and lemon law and all that. And you also tested a whole bunch of AI tools. I think you tested more than anyone I ever know. I think you tested like 20 tools while we were working with you. You kept comparing them against us. And I guess what I want to get into is like, I'd love your perspective, then I'll give my perspective maybe. I think the question is, if I'm the head of a law firm right now and I've got, 200 cases a month I'm signing and I don't know, 2,000 leads a month that I'm working on. And I'm like, all right, how do I scale this up? How do I get AI to do some or as much end-to-end intake as possible? The next question is like, well, which product or team or solution do I trust? And everyone says AI everything, and like it's impossible to discern sort of what's real out there. I guess from your perspective, what makes SuperPanel different, and why is SuperPanel, in your opinion, the best solution? And then I can answer that from my perspective, because I think we need to educate people on how drastically different the approaches are to product solutions in the market.
Yes, I tested a ton of different tools. The things that you actually were one of probably the first person that told me this. Credit to some of the owners of the group I used to work for. They were pretty motivated to test and try different things and see what's possible. So, but you once told me it's very easy to get to a minimum viable product, and I think that's absolutely true. Like with the large language models getting out, into the public and becoming more heavily adopted, it's very easy for people to come up with a minimal viable product. So I was always trying to see, how deep did these different tools go? So there's a lot of tools out there that can book appointments or can answer a call and take down information. And the people that can build those tools, like I can build those tools, and I've never coded a single line of code in my life. And I can build tools that can do that with some CRMs that are able to do that now. What I would caution law firm owners to think about when you are potentially getting in bed with, XYZ company who says they can do XYZ, take a look at who is the team behind that company and what is behind it. Is it a kid in his mom's, basement? Is it somebody who, just like a college kid that got out? Like, do they even have a website? Do they have an email address? Like, what is the background of the people that are doing this? Like, do they even come from the legal industry to be able to understand intake? Those are some things that I would look at. And what I liked about you and SuperPanel is you have, a background in building businesses and exiting. And Ding Yu, your co-founder, was an AI guy before AI was cool, going head to head with Microsoft and Amazon. And I know you'll talk a little bit more about that. So those are some of the things I'd say when you're in your selection kind of criteria zone. Next, how is the process on actually rolling the tool out? Most of these tools are like, hey, this is our tool. This is what it does. We can quote unquote connect to your CRM, which could mean a bunch of different things. Like, are they using a tool like Zapier just to connect to the CRM? Do they just have an API that, has limited capability? And then is it just going to do one thing? Is it just going to book meetings? Is it just going to, answer phone calls? Like, all those things are important to determine whether this is a long-term solution for the firm. Where SuperPanel is different is SuperPanel, you come in, you take a look at the entire workflow, you build a customized AI experience based on essentially if you were being hired as an employee. So how does XYZ firm do this part of the process? That is how SuperPanel is going to do that part of the process. And it doesn't matter if it's completely different than anything you've ever done before, because you have enough capability now to be able to adapt to any situation. And that is a big differentiator. I've seen it nowhere else. I've seen it nowhere else. Every other tool is, hey, we do intake. Yeah. What are your 9 intake questions? Let's get those answered. Boom. There's your solution. But that doesn't move the needle. And that's a big part of the reason why I think the MIT study said 95% of AI solutions are like not getting it, or adoption projects fail. It's probably because people are just buying the latest tool that does one narrow thing, and then it doesn't actually fit within their workflow. That's where you guys are different too. You explained this to me, and kind of like my dumb marine mind was able to wrap my head around it. There's 2 common ways to build these tools. One is one large prompt, where you cram everything into a large prompt. And if anything gets out of that funnel, if there's any variation that's out of what is contained in that prompt, it breaks. The other way to do it, that a lot of these tools do it, are a series of prompts down a happy path. Maybe if they're more sophisticated, they have some branches to that, but a series of prompts down a happy path. And if anything goes outside of that path, their tool's not able to handle it. And I've experienced like having to shut tools down and pause them. And like, why is my time being wasted 6 months after we like rolled this out on this thing that keeps breaking, which can be super frustrating. Where SuperPanel is different is, I think you're going to talk about it much more eloquently than I am, the cognitive decision engine, and which I love, is based on, the OODA loop framework: observe, orient, decide, and act. SuperPanel has a mission at each step of the way. Like in this stage, our mission is to collect initial evidence or collect initial information about this case. So SuperPanel can autonomously act to achieve that objective because of the way you set up this cognitive decision engine under the hood. The other great thing is the new voice model that you guys rolled out. Most of these tools are using 11 Labs, VAPI, maybe going directly to GPT or Microsoft for their voice models, and you guys built your own, which is the best AI voice I've ever heard. I've heard a lot of them, at least to this point. I'm sure there's people who have heard more, but I've heard quite a few, and yours is the best. I'm not biased, at least in that statement.
Hey, quick question for you. Does your intake and evidence collection process ever feel like the biggest bottleneck in your entire firm? Chasing follow-ups, collecting documents, and just trying to keep everything organized while leads are slipping through the cracks? That's exactly what SuperPanel fixes. It's like a digital teammate that automates everything from first contact all the way through to evidence collection. So nothing gets missed, and your team can focus on clients and legal work and not admin. If that sounds like something your firm needs, scan the QR code or click the link in the show notes to see how it works. Now back to the conversation.
I guess what I want to emphasize is just the approach that we see a lot of companies taking and some of the problems that arise from that. So, okay, let me share my screen and I'll just show you. So when you're looking at different AI solutions, again, like what you're saying, Eamon, right? It's so easy to build an MVP, and you can come at this MVP from different directions, but to make an AI agentic system work accurately at scale requires a totally different approach to the problem. And this is how the majority of the market comes at it and why it's problematic. And I want to kind of show where we come at the problem from. So you can think about any job, right? So think about like a job to be done, and not just the task. I'm talking like an end-to-end job function, like intake, which could involve multiple steps. And I'll get into how we think about that in a second. There's different categories of jobs or categories of work. There's categories of work that involve, reviewing documents, summarizing information in documents, drafting documents. There's a lot of stuff in legal that's a job category around reviewing, organizing, rewriting documents. That's a different category of work than interacting with customers, making decisions, moving people down a customer journey. So we're focused on customer journeys and building journeys or experiences that we take people through end to end. And we can do little bits of that, or we can do the entire thing end to end. But all of this fits into a job category. Now, if you look at all products on the market and all products that have come before us, there's been limitations on what type of complexity can be handled. So think think about like building a workflow in Salesforce or in companies like ServiceNow or whatever. They've all got these sort of like automation builders. And historically, every automation that you try to build, if you try to get technology to do something autonomously, you're completely reliant on building out rules that determine how that product should perform. And so you have to write a lot of code, and you got to go deep in an industry and understand how things are done. You got to write all these like if-else statements under the hood to be able to automate a job. And the result of that is, if you look at this continuum of like a simple to a complex job, if you're relying heavily on these deterministic rules to make decisions, the complexity of job that you can do autonomously has a cap to it. You can't really go much farther than that. This is supposed to be a little check mark. So you can do anything in here, but you can't do much more. And as automation gets a little more sophisticated, you can do a little bit more. But relying on rules, it gets really complex to build a system that can do a lot of work, because you have to write so much code, and there's so many different kind of custom use cases that you have to solve for, and it gets really complex. So what happened? AI started coming along long before ChatGPT. So AI, we started working on this with AI long before ChatGPT came out. And so AI basically allowed us to make probabilistic decisions, where it's not a rule. You're giving a decision to a reasoning engine to make a decision, but it's not based entirely on a rule. So there's some probabilistic distribution of the outcome of that decision. And so what that does is you can build solutions now over here, right? And those solutions can allow you to now tackle problems that are maybe a little more complex. And you start to expand your solution space here. And when LLMs came out, that was a big leap forward in the probabilistic decision making. And so what happened is, a lot of people, without a whole lot of grounding in how to build these systems, a lot of people ended up building these sort of AI only decision engines. And what's interesting is, if you just use a big prompt and you just use AI to do a lot of the work, you can actually get higher than this. You can actually leapfrog some of the complexity that you can handle with sort of the old AI models. And so you get these solutions that can handle certain tasks quite well, but they're also very unreliable because it's all probabilistic decision making. It's quite unreliable. And so depending on the job that you're trying to tackle, you need this combination of rules-based deterministic decision making and probabilistic decision making. If you're all rules-based, you're limited in what you can handle. If you're all probabilistic-based, you're also limited in what you can handle. And it turns out intake is like up here in terms of complexity. So it's very complex. There's a lot that can go wrong in a customer journey. There's a lot that needs to be understood. There's a lot of touch points. There's a lot of interactions over different channels. There's a lot of things that need to be done internally on systems, and ways that behavior needs to happen within internal systems like CRMs and case management tools. And to use heavy probabilistic decision-making or heavy rules-based and not enough probabilistic decision-making, it's going to break down. Like the performance just breaks down. And so when you look at these tools, you're seeing either a pretty heavy LLM-based tool that's going to break down and fail. And so basically it's only going to be able to handle, let's say, up to here in terms of complexity. And you're like, oh, AI doesn't work. It's breaking down. It's not able to handle this. Or you're seeing a lot of CRMs or case management system bolt on some probabilistic decision-making, and they can handle things over here, or maybe up here, they can handle some additional tasks. But what's required is a specific architecture that can handle enough rules to check off use cases here, but also not be so rules-based that like it's really hard to build for every customer and make it work for every customer, and also not be so AI-based that you can't trust it. And it turns out the only way to actually do that and to solve for the intake use case is every customer, almost invariably, to actually get AI to perform well at scale, it requires some amount of custom code in their environment. And so you need a platform that can handle complex rules using custom code on a customer by customer basis, as well as have that coupled with AI to make probabilistic decision making and the architecture to handle that. We've built the platform that handles this. We've built the architecture to handle this. We've built the internal tooling to allow us to get to that level of customization very quickly on every customer, such that our business is scalable. And we're not building custom software for everyone, but that requires a specific type of architecture. And that type of architecture, just to kind of go a little farther here. And so that type of architecture is multi-layered. So we've got this hierarchical architecture under the hood where the sort of top line organizing layer in the decision engine is we have some work outcome or output that needs to be done. This could be evaluating a case, qualifying a case, signing a case. This is a customer journey. And it's an end-to-end customer journey. And there's an outcome we're trying to nudge people to. Just like if you hired a person, you'd have to teach them about your customer journey and then guide them down that path. Now, what we're doing here is under the hood, we're then breaking this down into different, we call it sequences. And so sequence is a think about it like a workflow that has a start and a finish, and you can chain multiple sequences together to accomplish a customer journey. Within every sequence, we call it an agenda graph. Think about that as like a macro step of like, hey, at this stage in the customer journey, we need you to gather this information and do this. And here are the tools you got to use. And here's the access you have. And you got to get to this outcome. And then depending on the outcome, there's another stage or kind of macro step they need to go to. And so you can have this really complex mapping of these sort of macro steps along a customer journey within a workflow. And then even below that, there are sub-steps. So when an autonomous system is making decisions on what to do, not just in a sequence, but then in a macro step, then it's got to go down to sub-steps to be like, all right, how do I make decisions here? And to what Eamon's point was earlier is what's happening is it's constantly checking a state. It's using an OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. It's observing the situation. It's orienting itself against the goals that it's been trained to accomplish. It knows the tools that it has at its disposal. And then it's executing decisions and then coming back. And as the situation updates, it's then making new decisions based on its orientation, what it's trying to get to. And the only way it can do that with high accuracy at scale and repeatedly is to have this multi-layered architecture where it can move autonomously through all these different stages in a customer journey and be able to execute code functions and use different tools. It can use a browser. It can use, web forms, email, the CRM, the CMS. It can use an e-signature tool. And it has a combination of custom code for a specific law firm based on how they do things, as well as the reasoning engines, the most powerful LLMs models that have been honed and tailored to this use case. That's how it's able to work its way through. And one of the things Eamon mentioned is voice. We found that we had to build our own voice engine because voice is like, there's how a voice sounds, but then there's also all the little intricacies of how you interact with a voice. Like we naturally as humans kind of know when someone is done speaking and maybe they're not like thinking about something else to say. We understand, people's tone and can be empathetic based on what they're saying. You have to get to like really micro inference levels in a voice model to be able to accomplish that level of human-like interaction. And we just weren't able to accomplish that off of any of the off-the-shelf voice platforms, voice AI tools. And so we ended up building our own that's been outperforming everything we tried off the shelf just because we had to build it just because we're just focused on these complex use cases. There's so many other use cases for voice AI that doesn't require that level of complexity. But this multi-layered architecture using that OODA loop framework to make decisions, that cognitive decision engine, and then the tooling that we have to be able to quickly spin up custom code on every customer's account to make sure we're making the AI system drive a customer journey and behave in a way that is specific to a firm that we're working with. Our ability to execute that quickly and implement that with that level of sort of bespokeness, that's even a word. That's the only way that you get AI to actually perform at scale. we can talk about like the pilot approach and how you experience that as a customer, but also how we approach that to make sure that people, trust the system before they scale up.
Yeah, let's talk about the pilot. I love the pilot approach for a couple different reasons. One, it allows you to work out all the bugs with the firm before going live, without the firm being on the hook for some sort of long-term partnership and typically not too much of a time commitment. Then rolling out in the pilot, like the way we did it was we built it out, at least the narrow use cases. We started with just, responding to form fill leads. We then tested it internally. We then tested it on 10 leads and then evaluated how it did on those leads. Then we made some tweaks and we came back. We tested it probably on another 10, 20 leads, and then we evaluated that. Then we started with like 5% of leads or something like that. And we continued to monitor it and see how it performed. And then as time progressed, we got it to handle 100% of the leads. And I was very eager. I remember being very eager to get it to 100% of leads due to some of the objectives that I had. So I was very happy to get it to 100% of leads quickly, but there was really no reason not to. Like, objectively speaking, the data never said no. The data always said, yes, do more. Because I won't speak for every single SuperPanel client, but at least in my instance, being a client, the data always pointed towards SuperPanel performing better. And I think that's probably true overall because humans are humans. Humans can have bad days. Humans, can forget things, and humans have biases. So if you just follow the data, you're going to end up getting to 100% of your leads are being handled by SuperPanel. And that's what happened with us. We then started to add more pieces of the process to it. We went and added, inbound calls. We added, document collection. There's probably some other things that we added that I can't even think of right now. We started live transferring calls to our intakers. Self-serve signing, right, the huge one. Can AI sign a client without a human ever being involved? The answer is yes, it can do it. SuperPanel does it. They do it, every month. There are probably many signups that come from that. I don't know the exact number of percent, but we certainly had them signing SuperPanel signing cases. And I think what's important to think about if you're a law firm and you're looking to adopt a tool like this, most other tools are going to say, hey, sign a contract, we're going to implement, and, you're stuck with us for a year, or if you're lucky, it's month to month, and you're going to get what it is. But with SuperPanel, you do a pilot, you pay a fee for the pilot. That covers, quite frankly, SuperPanel is probably losing money on every single pilot, but it gives you the ability to say, okay, this is working. We're excited. We believe. And at that point, Julien comes in and says, now time to switch to a long-term contract. And I don't think there's been one pilot that hasn't converted because the customer service and the quality is so high. Correct me if I'm wrong about that. But yeah, I love that approach. It is a much more intentional and individualized experience for the law firm. And it's funny, I was on one of my clients is implementing a law firm CRM. I won't say their name, but I was on the implementation call last night, and it was like the guy probably ran the same implementation call 100 times, exact same way. And I asked a couple questions and completely threw them off because they just have their playbook, and it's, every law firm is different. So for small law firms, that's probably fine to run things like that. But for, medium to large size law firms where there's a ton of complexity and there's a way of doing things, you can't expect a tool out of the box just to fit in seamlessly and then be, a resounding success. Obviously, there are tools where that is the case, but not tools that are interacting with clients and are the sales mechanism for the firm. It's just way too important of a use case to leave that up to chance,
One of the things I credit you with as well, I remember very early on, now we've done a ton of implementations and it's different. But especially at the beginning, we were especially a bit probably more cautious than we even needed to be then, because we wanted things to go well. We were monitoring everything. We still do that, but we're monitoring everything and trying to make sure things are doing well. And I remember when we were working with you and you were at the firm, is you said, you're like, Julien, I've got 50 people that are doing this job day to day. You're like, we have a certain error rate across the entire team. Like, there are so many mistakes every day. And so the faster you can get your system to make some mistakes and then fix it, and then just keep iterating until the error rate on your system is lower than the error rate on our human team, the better. And your approach was like, let's just keep running cohorts until we get that error rate down. And honestly, that kind of influenced how we started building out our onboarding in general. Was like, how do we call it a stabilization point? Or like, how do we get to the stabilization point? And let's just continually A/B test. And I'll pull up another graph here just to show what that looks like and how we do this now.
I appreciate you never told me that before. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that was you pushing us in the early days.
I remember pushing you really hard at 20 other tools, because I was like, you guys need, you want to win this horse race, you guys you have to deliver.
Go faster, go faster.
I made the strategic bet that this was, when you hire 300 people in like X amount of months and then have churn, 80% of that, it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
Those weren't my numbers. I mean, that was a little bit of an exaggeration, but
there is high churn and intake. There's high churn and intake. Yeah. So the approach we take with pilots now is it's quite structured. And so we look at, that customer journey, right? So what's the entire customer journey? What's the journey we're trying to build? We don't build the whole thing and launch the whole thing in day one. Not at all. We break it down and we say, okay, what are all the steps here? What are the different workflows, sequences that we need to set up? Again, in our product, we call them sequences. And then we say, okay, for that part of your workflow as a firm right now, what is the current success benchmark? How are you measuring that today? Whether it's conversion rate or connection rate or speed to first contact with a lead, whatever it is, what is the current success rate and how do you measure that? And so we'll build out a sequence that then does that part of the flow. And like what you said before, like we just run it on a small cohort. So we might just run it on 10. First, we run it internally, and then we might run it on 10 leads. So if I come here, like we'll just run it on 10 leads and that's it. And then we evaluate, well, like, how did every one of those go? Did things mess up? And more often than not, there's like, especially when you first launch a secret, like there's things that aren't quite right. And so we make some iterations and tweak to the system, and then we run it on another 10 leads, maybe 20 this time. We check it, we evaluate it, and then we run it on another 10. And we don't yet have a significant sample size to really compare from an A/B testing perspective, but we're iterating to the point where we think it's like performing as well, if not better, than the current way of doing things. And then once we get to a point where it's running pretty well, we'll run it on, let's say, 10% of all leads going through a given funnel. And if it's still performing well, usually there's like one or two iterations here, it hits what we call this stabilization point, where it's consistently performing at or above the way you're currently doing things, the human team is doing things. And you kind of reorient your workflow to be like, all right, AI is now going to handle this part of it. Let's now ramp this part of the workflow from 10% up to 100%. And now let's add on another piece. Maybe let's go deeper. Let's have it do more. Let's have it do more. And we take the same approach with every chunk of the workflow that we add as we build out that entire customer journey. That way, we're not just throwing something on and hoping it works. It's this iterative approach where we're testing against the current benchmarks and making sure that it's working. And I think that's the only way you can get AI systems to work accurately at scale in such a way that consumers prefer that path and go down that path consistently, and you're able to scale up your operations. Otherwise, every problem you're afraid might happen can happen, and like you don't even know about it. Like, you need this iterative approach. And then it also, even once you're fully set up and running, then like maybe you change some of your operations. Maybe start taking new types of cases. We got to launch this again with a new type of case, or maybe you open up in a new state and that we got to make some tweaks. And so this is an ongoing relationship where we're helping each firm deploy this agentic system in their environment and test it and benchmark it, make sure it's always working with this iterative approach.
So another thing that differentiates SuperPanel is most of these tools out there are like, hey, pay X amount of fee for X amount of usage. Nothing is tied to results, or most of what I saw is not tied to results. But the way SuperPanel prices is based on results. So SuperPanel truly is a long-term partner in the firm's success because you are financially incentivized for the firm to succeed, which is one of the big things that I like about how you guys approach that. As a firm, I'm paying for the amount of signups that you guys help get across the line. I obviously am monetizing those cases that are signed up, and you are financially incentivized to sign up more and better quality cases as well, which is, it makes a long-term relationship and partnership make a lot of sense. So that's another thing, most tools out there will say, hey, it's $10,000 a month based on your volume, XYZ, no responsibility, accountability on results, as long as, your check clears, that's all that they care about. So that's where SuperPanel is different. I'm sure there are other tools out there that are going to move towards that model. The better ones, I would imagine will, but that's a really good way if you're a law firm owner or ops guy or gal who is evaluating tools, like what is their pricing structure? Pricing on results implies a certain confidence in hitting those results, whereas just sticker price is maybe not as assured on the results as maybe it should be.
Yeah, it makes sense. That makes sense. What do you think about switching gears to like just the adoption of AI in work streams or like broad job functions that can involve multiple people? Because you and I read an article recently which really resonated, talking about how AI adoption on an individual basis is very high. People will adopt tools and it makes them better and they're interacting with AI and like everyone's adopting it. It's great. But to change an entire workflow and like reorganize how your business does things, that's different. And there's also risk involved, right? Where like there's even a bit of a disincentive maybe if, let's say, an intake, right? You're maybe an intake leader and like, well, if I implement AI to do this and I'm on the cutting edge of doing this, like, am I putting my own job at risk or my friends' jobs at risks or whatever it might be? Yeah. How do you think about that? And like, how have you seen that, encountered that, overcome that? Because there's such a huge benefit to the companies for figuring it out first, but then like...
I've seen a lot of bad AI projects. I don't just work with law firms. I work with other companies as well. And the one thing that I'd say about that is companies that are looking to implement AI, but don't have their process mapped out and thought through already are going to have a tough time to do it. I think what that article hit on, people adopt AI individually a lot faster than companies is because people know what they're doing and they're the sole decision maker on how they're going to execute their task. But for a company, you need to really have a defined process to be able to say, how is AI going to make this better? Or more efficient or whatever. And then the leadership of the company, the mid-level management, and then the, on the ground folks all need to be aligned to execute on that objective. So you can't do that if you don't know, if you think AI is not, a silver bullet that's going to come in and just save a company. There's poorly implemented AI in Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies. You have to really have a dialed in, mapped out process. And then when you implement AI, it's more of a journey than just like hey, roll out this one project and then there we go.
Have you seen the fear, I guess, from teams that are worried it might replace some of their work, or like how has that manifested and how have you handled those conversations?
Almost every time everybody hears the stories and the predictions from the AI gurus that people aren't even going to be working in the next 10 years and we're all going to be, on the streets or in a utopia because AI is going to solve all our problems. But people functionally think AI is coming for their jobs. I've seen a lot of small businesses are just, scared of AI because of that. How do I deal with it? The way I always try to approach things is by saying, hey, AI is here to help, to be a partner for you. For an intaker, for example, let's use an intaker. Hey, this AI is going to make you more effective. You are going to be able to sign up more clients. You are going to be able to make more money because of this AI. And if we don't end up needing this amount of intakers to do this job, great. We're going to sign up more cases where some of you maybe will become, client service reps or some other job in the firm where the AI can allow you to do more, and the whole firm is going to grow as a result of that. That's how I always try to frame it. But then of course there's things, you always see on the news where there's CEOs that, adopt AI, then I won't name any names, adopt AI, fire thousands of people, and then realize they need to rehire thousands of people when the AI adoption doesn't work. So I've never adopted AI to sole purpose of reducing headcount. I prefer just to maybe not backfill if that's the case, or if that's necessary. But it is also
repurpose into other areas. It sounds like too.
Repurposing into other areas is great because if for a law firm, if you're optimizing intake, you're going to get a bunch more cases. You're going to need to handle those cases. And one of the biggest problems with law firms, after somebody signs up with a law firm, they don't hear from them for months, which is incredibly frustrating if you're a client. So there's plenty of other jobs to be done. And especially if somebody has that firm culture and they're a good cultural fit and they work hard, like there's no reason to just get rid of somebody because AI made things more efficient. That's how I like to frame it. That's how I like to get everybody from the senior executives down to, the tip of the spear, on board. So
yeah, makes sense. Well, Eamon, this is awesome. We covered a lot of ground here. There's a lot more we could talk about, but we should save it for another episode. Let's wrap it there.
Thanks for checking out the Scalable Law Blueprint. If today's conversation helped you think differently about how your law firm runs, share this episode with a colleague and don't forget to follow the show so you never miss what's next. To see how automation can transform your intake and operations, visit superpanel.io and discover how leading plaintiff firms scale with confidence. I'm Julien Emery, and I'll see you in the next episode.